It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, newsbreakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Michael Monte knows a lot about affordable housing. He's the executive director of Champlain Housing Trust, a nonprofit that owns or manages more than 2,500 affordable apartments and more than 100 shelter beds or hotel rooms in Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle counties. The organization relies on federal, state, and private funding to make the numbers work in a market where home prices and rents have skyrocketed. Its funding has included philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott, who recently gave CHT $20 million. Champlain Housing Trust also stewards 675 homes that qualified buyers can purchase with no down payment and keep a portion of the profit when they sell. CHT is an outgrowth of the Burlington Community Land Trust, which began 40 years ago with a model where people could buy a residence and the trust would maintain ownership of the land underneath. In this edition of 802 News, sponsored in part by Red Hen Baking Company, Monte talks about the land trust model, the challenges to build and buy affordable housing, and the recent surge in homeless people. 7 Days had a good series talking about the affordability of housing, and they talked about the median price of a home in Vermont during the first half of 2022 was $295,000. In Chittenden County, it was $424,000.
Sounds cheap. So it's gone up. The model still works in that we can, when we get our hands on the housing, we're preserving affordability so somebody's able to afford it. The issue in our world right now, especially in Chittenden County, is that lots of people have been wanting to move here. The vacancy rate was 0.5%, and a healthy vacancy rate is 5%. The people who, the number of folks coming here post-pandemic, and maybe falsely, at least, well, maybe correctly in Chittenden County in terms of climate change or in terms of public safety, like because they're LGBTQ or whatever, those kinds of influx of people have been coming here and driving the costs of housing to be out of reach for many people. So that's the reason why some of these conditions have existed in housing. Is it the model still works? Yeah, the more we can build regular housing for everyone, and the more we can build affordable housing for people who are low and moderate income, the better it's going to be. We house, 5,000 people, 6,000 people. They're in better shape than most anybody else out there.
The term affordable housing is something that, you were the director of CEDO, you worked for the city of Burlington, you've been doing this for 40 years. Even 40 years ago, people were talking about affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing. It seems like we have built a ton of housing in Vermont, and it's probably one of the top 3 issues in Vermont still today.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Again, I think the market conditions changed is what has impacted that. You could still, we were also talking about the islands of affordability. You could still see in certain parts in Burlington where 25% of the housing is affordable and is available for both rental or home ownership. Achieving 25% across the board in the state of Vermont, if that was done right now, would be dramatic impact. That's not what we have right now. And so we want to be able to expand that as a percentage or as a number. If the governor says, and other folks say it, and we agree, 30,000 new homes need to be built, 25% of those should be affordable. We need to be able to expand the housing stock across the state because the demand is so great. And secondly, we really need to be able to make sure that low and moderate income people can afford, sort of rental housing. There is another level of home ownership, which is now out of reach for many people. That's where we play as well. And I think we just got to continue to do that. At this point, what I heard the saying today, the right time to plant the tree was 10 years ago. Still, better go plant it right now. I think it's the same thing here. We did this work over the last 30, 40 years. Right now, we sell 35 homes every year on turnover. Don't have to invest any more money. They're simply managing 35 new homeowners every year coming through our housing. 300 folks moved into our rental housing. We didn't have to build those. So we got to continue to build that stock of housing. And I think that's what we hope to be able to do. We've done a lot over the last couple of years, and we need to do that in the state of Vermont for the next 5 years for sure.
So it's a demand issue, not a supply issue, or I mean,
It's both. It's both.
It's
Yeah,
both.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, if when the private sector folks say we need to get regulatory issues out of the way so that we can build more housing, I don't disagree. Yeah, we need all kinds of housing, but if we're only going to build housing that's going to cost $3,000 or $4,000 a month in rent, that's affordable to very few folks. That's not going to meet the issues either. If we only built very affordable housing like that we do, if we only did that, that's not going to meet the market demand. So we need that mix. And we need that range. The demand is there. The number of people who want to live in Vermont is still great. I know the governor talks about demographic issues, and he's correct. It's not what's going on in Chittenden County. The number of folks moving into Chittenden County, the people who are coming here from other parts of the world, the people who are moving here to live here, is still pretty dramatic and impactful upon the market. And I think there's pockets of that throughout the state. If you went to Brattleboro, White River, a few other places, you would see like the demand is so high for more housing in those locations. We just need to build housing, a wide range of it, and a good chunk needs to be affordable.
Going back to that number that I cited, so what's a typical amount that a Champlain Housing Trust home is selling for compared to this median number of $295 statewide for 24?
Yeah, so our shared equity homes are selling anywhere between 125 to 200,000, probably even on average maybe more like 150, 160. Those are 2 or 3 bedrooms, nice homes. We have a wide variety of homes. That's the thing. It's not this is just affordable housing that you build. It's like we have single family homes. We have homes out in the countryside in Colchester, out in Jericho. We have homes in downtown Burlington. So it's a really wide variety. We have smaller homes like just over here at Stratos on St. Paul Street that sell for $200,000, and we might have a single family home with a big garden that might be selling for $175,000. So it depends on when it started, that pricing and how that changes. But it's affordable to, I would say, 70% of median income, meaning you could be earning way below the median income and afford one of our homes. Our homes now typically are less expensive to own than it is to rent. Okay, that's mainly what we're seeing now is when everything is sort of factored in, it's less expensive to own one of our homes than it is to rent a home.
Wow.
In the marketplace. Now, not in terms of our rental housing, which is more affordable, but if you're going to buy efficiency or one bedroom and it's going to cost you $2,000, we can get you into a home for much less than that.
Okay, and this is going back to the model we talked about before. If I buy one of your homes, I own the home, but not the land underneath it. So.
Yeah, or certainly, yes, but again, because we're doing more condominiums, there's a covenant as opposed to a land lease. But you basically own the home, but you don't own all of it. Any appreciate what we sell it for, what you buy it for, you only get a limited level of the appreciation. So. Again, you buy a home for $500,000, we sell it to you for $200,000. If the price goes up to $300,000, you don't get to keep that $100,000 more from that $200,000. You get to keep a portion of that. So essentially, we keep it affordable through a formula that's in the covenant or in the land lease. Yeah.
Okay. When you held up your hand there showing me how much I made, it seemed like a really small number.
Less than typical. If you owned a home, if you bought a home for $100,000 and sold it for $500,000, you would keep $400,000.
Yeah.
For CHT, you would keep $100,000.
Okay.
That would be a simpler set of numbers to use. And that's because we sold it to you for such a little less amount. You don't get to pocket all that money.
Right. Right.
Back when the Burlington Community Land Trust was just started, we talked about the idea not just as affordable housing, but also as a way of really keeping the public investment sort of in the community and as public, and that nobody was going to go home and pocket a lot of money because of this one-time opportunity or this one-time gift that they got. That stayed within the public's realm, stayed with it as a community resource. And so that was actually supported by many of the Republicans, remember, on the city council, thinking this is a good thing. Yeah, we don't want to just give it away. You earn it. And, the truth is most of our homeowners go off and take some money that they made on their house, on their resale, and buy a home in the private sector, in the private market. 80% folks move on to regular home ownership, shall we say, not shared equity home ownership. And so there's wealth building that goes on. Some people live in their homes forever. And certainly people die in their homes, lived in their homes for decades. So it's really a wide range of experiences. Most people stay in their homes typically, as most people do, 5 or 6 years, 7 years, and they move on. The market's a little tighter now, so a lot of people are moving on because interest rates are higher, and it's a little harder to find a home that's affordable. That's the last year. That might change over the next year.
Do you have a huge waiting list of people that want these homes that are under your purview?
I would say that we have a decent number of folks who want to buy shared equity homes, for sure. I wouldn't say it's a huge waiting list, but if we have a good home that goes up for sale, we'll have inquiries of 15, 20 people, and we have to select people. There's a system of points and all that stuff that in order to select people. So we don't do a bidding war. We're not raising the price because it's a set price, right? So there's a lot of interest in our shared equity homes. We have a lot of interest in our rental housing, a great and incredible need. Right now, it'll take 12 to 15 months before somebody can move into one of our rental housing. 2,000 or 3,000 people filling applications every year. We only have turnovers of 300 or so. We may be adding 100 or so, 200 units a year. So we're not able to meet the demand, certainly for the rental housing, which is, I think, more of a crisis right now overall in the community. And then it filters down into the crisis in homelessness that is occurring.
Just go back here. If a home goes on the market, what happens? What's the process for it being sold?
You notify us. We want to sell our home. We will then do an appraisal of the home. We'll take a look and see what the new value of the home is. We'll say, okay, your share of the appreciation is 25%. It appreciated by $100,000, let's say. You're getting $25,000. Oh, you made some improvements. Okay, you get credit for that, for those things. And of course, whatever you paid down on your mortgage, you're keeping that too. We're not jumping in the middle of that. Everybody's privately mortgaged, and so we do that calculation. And then we go and we bring in homeowners who are interested in buying a shared equity home, and they're all looking at your home, and somebody says, yeah, I want to buy that home. They go get bank financing. We qualify them. They go get bank financing, and then there's an exchange of sale from that individual to Champlain Housing Trust, and then to the new family. So that's how it works.
How do you pick? I would imagine there might be more than a few people that want that home.
Yeah.
So how do you pick?
There is a point system that gives some set of priorities for individuals. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it goes into family size and how long you've been waiting and readiness and a whole range of things like that. So it is not supposed to be random. It's not random.
And there typically are more than one person looking at the home, right?
Usually anywhere between 5 and 10 or 15, yeah.
Okay, so why do you say that rental is more of an issue now than home ownership?
Well, in terms of sort of the capacity or availability, it is an issue in terms of affordability for folks who want to buy a home, who don't want to do shared equity home, and they want to be in the market, and interest rates are high. They need, for folks especially young people who have a loan, right, who have all these other issues, they don't have any money for down payment. It's hard for them to buy a home in the open market. So it is an issue still for terms of home ownership. I see rental housing is an issue just because it is now working with a group of folks who are low income, moderate income, who are vulnerable, who have probably are a couple of steps away from being homeless. And then the impact on the community and the society is greater because of the level of services they need, the level of shelter. Shelters cost more than apartments. The math is kind of crazy, but it costs more to put people up in a motel room or in a shelter than it does simply renting them an affordable apartment. So I think we need to create more rental housing in order to deal with sort of, I think, the crisis of the 2,000 or so plus people who are homeless in the state of Vermont right now. And that's why that's the compelling I think, story right now in front of us. It always was an issue. It's greater than it ever has been, especially over the last since the pandemic has ended, for a range of reasons. So.
Well, let's talk about that. Why do you think it's happening?
There's at least two or three. One is a certain level of economic displacement. I can't simply afford a rental housing anymore, and so I'm going to be living. I'm homeless. I mean, there's a number of employers who are out there who have entry-level jobs, who are employing people who are living in their cars. I won't name names, but they will be companies with 3 or 5 people living in their cars because they have no place to live. You had University of Vermont Medical Center build housing for its workers because they had no place to go, no place to live. So if you don't, the reason why there's homelessness is in part because of economic issues, economic displacement issues, higher level of substance abuse disorder, a higher level, I think, of mental health issues that sort of came out of the pandemic in terms of sort of the impact and the trauma of that. So I think that those issues have created larger numbers of people who are homeless. Some people will say, we have all these services and that's why we have so many homeless, and that's not really the case. It's really, I think, those things, those 3 or 4 factors all mixed in that have created, I think, a higher number of folks who need a response.
And what it sounds like building shelters isn't what you would suggest.
Well, I would say that the model that we have done or looked at is building shelters that can be converted into permanent housing. I would say short term we may need shelters. Let's just do Chittenden County. The numbers are 700 or so people who are homeless. 200 or so, maybe less than that, have no place to live. They're not in a shelter. They're not in a motel room. They're living on the street in a campsite somewhere. That is a tough group. Then there's a bunch of people who are in shelters, and then there's a bunch of people who are going through like the state system with motel room systems. Out of that 700 or so, in order for us to really be successful and get people who are homeless out of homelessness, the first thing we have to do is we have to manage the people who are totally unsheltered right now and the people in the motel system. They need a better shelter system. We need to, and then also build more affordable housing. And in the state of Vermont, amongst a group of folks that we work with and talk with, we talk about the need for building 6,000 new affordable housing units in the whole state over the next few years of affordable housing, of which a percentage of those will be for homelessness. And with the turnover in the system of people who are providing nonprofit housing, we're doing about 35% of our turnovers are for folks who are homeless. We'll be able to move everybody out of shelters and out of homelessness over the next 3 to 5 years. The issue is, though, that there's a number of folks who need not just shelter or housing, but they also need services in a serious way. They need not just housing first, but medical treatment first, or crisis intervention first, or drug addiction treatment first as well. And there's a decent number of those folks on the street at this point that need some focus and attention. And that's outside of housing, and that's why we've actually went from a couple of folks in our resident services in a property management. We created a whole separate department of folks, and now there's 12 people working, doing that kind of work, because the needs of the people in our housing is greater than it ever has been in terms of services and support.
When you say that kind of work, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so our resident services folks is different. So there are a lot of outreach programs. I mean, everybody seems to have one. I think the city has one, Howard has one, the police department has one,
Yep.
CVOEO. Ours are really focusing on the people who are housed. So within our housing program, people who are who are in our rental housing, we have resident services staff who will respond to what property managers or maintenance or other folks will say, hey, something's not right here. Or somebody's banging on their door really loudly in the middle of the night. The neighbors will call saying, what's going on? Property managers say, hey, what's going on? And we're responding, I think, with resident services support. So our folks are really serving people in our communities, in our properties. Sometimes in Susan's place, where there's 72 apartments which were formerly homeless, sometimes scattered throughout the Old North End, but a wider range of sort of housing types, and that's who we're serving.
Michael Monte is the CEO of Champlain Housing Trust. Back after this. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999. Continuing our discussion with Michael Monte, the Executive Director of Champlain Housing Trust. Did it make no sense to end the motel voucher program on a financial, humane level?
God, I described this just I think today too. Like I feel like I'm in World War I, and I'm going to say, where should I build a trench? I'll build a trench over this direction. No, maybe the trench should be going there. It feels like every once in a while, it's like whatever decision you're making, you're still just dealing with what you have to deal with in terms of the homelessness stuff. Meaning that somebody could have said to me, "Oh yeah, ending this, it would be humane because then people will be able to self-manage themselves out of this thing." Other people will say that's the worst thing you could possibly do. I'm more now inclined to think that we had to continue to have people housed in shelter-like programs. I'm not too sure. I think the governor has talked about congregate shelters. That's really not the best thing to do. Motel program is expensive. I think that's really the best approach for folks. I think the motels need to be publicly owned, mostly non-profitly owned, and they need a better level of services at them. And that would have been the best solution. It's really expensive. So the reason why that hasn't happened is only because of price, not because that's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is get people into short-term shelter and then into permanent housing with services. We talk about solving homelessness really needs a larger number of supply of affordable housing, a higher level of subsidy for people because they're very low income, and a higher level of services because of the needs of the individuals. Most of the folks who are homeless now need to have those three S's. It's not cheap. And it isn't like just sort of like not doing anything about it makes it go away. They simply just hang out on the street. They simply are camping out on sites. There's 200 people camping out right now in Burlington. And with the drug issues, it became that people, as we know, are now self-medicating themselves with these drugs on the city streets, inside their cars, wherever they can, making believe, not supporting a response to that, and does not make that simply go away. I think the response from the state has been mostly good. The governor's now having a press conference around housing, so I could opine about that at some other point, but I think that the response from the legislature certainly has been very positive in terms of responding to the needs to respond to the needs of homelessness and more affordable housing.
But they supported curtailing the hotel voucher program
until they didn't. Until they realized the impact, and then you could sort of see still then the impact of even some of that curtailment with the number of people who are hanging out on the streets. It wasn't a positive impact.
Right.
Didn't solve anything.
Right.
None of it was simply people sleeping in tents on the greenbelts. So is that the solution? No. So what are you going to do? And frankly, what I really do think is that there needs to be a higher level of treatment for people. I really do. For folks many of those folks suffering from substance abuse disorders, and we all know about fentanyl and all the other things that have created havoc. Higher levels of treatment for folks. People not to need them not just be housed, but if they're going to be sheltered, there needs to be a treatment modality as well. Not for all homeless folks, but for a decent chunk. I think that's what needs to happen, and that's new. When you sort of say, "Hey, in the '80s we talked about affordable housing," that really wasn't as dramatic as it was even 3 to 5 years ago. I mean, I think that maybe Champlain talked about this 10 years ago around saying, "Hey, we have a heroin."
Yeah. Yeah.
But frankly, that was all being managed pretty well. And then I think the pandemic with a new set of drugs have created some real havoc.
Yeah, he was really talking, my interpretation, what he was talking about was more Purdue Pharma, painkillers, those kind of opioids. And now, I mean, we're talking, I mean, this is xylazine stuff. I talked to the EMTs here.
Yeah.
This stuff is...
It's rotting your skin off, and you're mixing xylazine with fentanyl or with heroin, and suddenly you're in this other state of physical disarray where you're not able to do anything. You're leaning over. You're barely able to move, and you don't even know that you're in this addictive state. That's how dramatic it is. I get to work with folks from around the country, so I have conversations with folks from San Francisco and Seattle, in different locations, and I can know that, in fact, how bad it can be in those communities. We're not there, but we need to respond differently than we have been. People need to be able to be moved out of that into shelter, recognizing that they have substance abuse disorder, and get treatment and support to get out of it. And we need to figure out the modalities of treatment that are going to really work. And there's some work that's going on that's positive about that. People might have mixed opinions about a safe injection site, but some of the evidence coming out of New York City says that it works. That most people who go to these sites ultimately move off of drugs because they're now sitting in a bed with a nurse and a doctor nearby and some food, and it's warm, and they're getting support, and they're being said, "Hey, you want to stop this? We can help you stop this." So it's, think of it as, sort of a way of getting people into a place where maybe there's some intervention that could happen. And so that's the most hopeful thing I've heard lately. Some people still think that they're not right. But that's going to be a big debate at the state level. Again, this is not housing.
Yeah.
This is homelessness, right? So,
right.
I'm way over my skis on this stuff for the most part.
And, one of the things I've been cautioned about, and I took to heart, is to not conflate the opioid problem with the homeless problem.
There are people who are homeless who are working at factories every night. They report, they park their car someplace, and they drive to work, and they go to work, and they come back, and they only have enough money for food and for their car. And so there's definitely economic homelessness, right, and displacement. And actually, as the market has gotten sort of out of whack a little bit in terms of the higher rent, such high rents that have been happening in Chittenden County, certainly in Burlington, a little bit more economic displacement has occurred. Don't want to pick on them, but the Bowes property in Winooski is a great example of those 20 families now being totally displaced. New units are going to be built, 75 of them. They're not going to be economically viable for those 20 families that got displaced, or for low and moderate income people. So that's an impact. That's a real thing. But I would still say that even as we sort of work through that, and that's getting great new affordable housing units online, which we're working on. We have about 500 units in our pipeline, and are moving them as fast as we can to get them up and running. There is still this other medical sort of response that needs to happen, and I say medical because that's what substance abuse disorder is all about. It's about responding to the medical needs of people who are addicted, and that's a chunk of folks.
What's been the impact of Airbnbs on affordable housing?
Same thing, same market impact. I mean, I could take.
But how big has that been? Has it been as big as some people portray it, or not as bad, or worse?
Well, if the belief is that you need to have more housing units in order to have a balanced market, then Airbnbs is the reversal of that. It's taking housing units out of the market. Somebody described to me today somebody who bought, somebody bought 19 homes throughout Vermont and turned them all into Airbnbs. these throughout Vermont. Now they're just simply running an Airbnb, single-family homes throughout Vermont. That's what they're doing. Those homes are no longer affordable to a Vermonter to buy, to own, to plant tomatoes on, right?
They're hedge fund investments. Literally.
Yes. And Wall Street is filled with these folks who are making investments in buying single-family homes and flipping them. And that's been happening also around here. And so I think there's about 5 or 6 enemies of affordable housing. Regulatory issues perhaps are on that list. I'm not going to say it's a big issue, but nevertheless it still is impactful in terms of people needing to get permit from one place and permits from another place and being appealed in the wrong way and all that other stuff. That's an impact. Airbnbs is an impact. Sort of the overall market of people wanting to live here is an impact, not a negative impact, but nevertheless an impact on the market. Higher interest rates, higher costs of labor and materials, that's all a part of the factor. All these things get mixed into not having not a good housing market as a result.
And is that the answer to my next question, which is what's the impediment to those 6,000 units you talked about a little bit back? That's what we need in terms of affordable housing units?
So in terms of affordable housing, the issue has been, literally 3 to 5 years ago, the amount of money that was put for affordable housing in the state of Vermont was through the Vermont Housing Conservation Board and the low-income housing tax credits. Vermont Housing Conservation Board would get $15 million, which was nothing. That would maybe build 120 units someplace. Okay, not enough. If the Vermont Housing Conservation Board had been fully funded for the last 10 years or decade, the way it was supposed to be by statute, 1,000 other units would have been up and running. So it's that planting a tree 10 years ago. It's still time to plant a tree, but we forgot to make that investment a decade ago. The number of overall market rent units that are being built overall in the country, and certainly in Vermont, has decreased dramatically compared to the 50s and 60s. That also has had an impact. But certainly if we had and so having more market rate units gives people some more mobility, gets a little more flexibility in the market, is a positive thing. But again, for us, what we see is a need for building another 6,000 affordable housing units within the state of Vermont over the next 5 years. And in order to do that, it's not going to be $15 million for the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. It's going to have to be the same level of investment that has occurred over the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, here's a really dumb question, and pardon the naivety. Why doesn't if there's a demand, why doesn't the private sector do it?
Well, because the private sector can't do it because it can't, the cost of management and then the cost for them to do and borrow money is just simply doesn't allow them to get to a rent that's affordable. The only reason why we're able to make things affordable is we have a slightly higher cost per unit than the private sector, but beyond that is that we get equity or cash and grant monies that write down the pricing, and we don't have to borrow money. Maybe 20% of our overall capital stack, they call it, in our building of a housing apartment or unit may be a mortgage or a note from a bank. The rest of it is all different kinds of things, tax credits and grants from Vermont Housing Conservation Board, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, whatever we can scare up in different places, different locations. The private sector doesn't have any of that necessarily. It has access to that. Some members of the private sector have done that, but they're not as skilled as dealing with homeless issues and resident services as we are. And so we have been more focused on being the recipient of those kinds of funds in the past.
Okay, again, probably a dumb question, but the private sector can't build houses that sell for $150,000 to $200,000 because it costs so much for them to build it. There's so much demand for houses that are $300,000 to $400,000. What's stopping the private sector from filling this need?
Yeah. So the cost of development per unit is about $400,000 to $450,000. Start there. Okay.
Wow.
That's what it costs to build something. Okay. You might be able to get it a little cheaper, but not much. But that's what the cost of development is. You take land, you take permitting, you take architectural services, the cost of construction, everything else. It's a total development cost is the word we used. It's $400,000 to $500,000, maybe even a little higher. Lately, it might be going down because the cost of goods are going down a little. But for the most part, it's in that range. In order to make that affordable to somebody, you're going to need $300,000 out of that $400,000 from some other source, because you can't really afford to make that a principal and interest payment on a debt. And nobody will put that much of your own equity into it to make it work. If you ask a private sector guy, he'll sell more housing at a lower price than he would at a higher price. So there's very few of these guys who are going to go in and say, yeah, I'm going to build a 3,000 square foot $1 million home, and I'm going to sell them like crazy. They're not. There's only so many people in the market for that. They'd rather be in a price point that's in that $500,000 or $600,000 range. That's what's going to make most sense for them. They could sell more of those than not. They'll sell like crazy if they can get them down to $400,000. They will so much demand for that. So a lot of the folks who are building housing, a lot of the people we work with, don't want to be so high priced, but they still need to go out and borrow a lot of money to do it. And it's still the cost of construction is still there, and the cost of land is still there, and all these other things are still there. So they can only price it so much. They can only price it to such a low level. They just can't do that.
If you could wave your hand with one magic wand wish, what would be the one cost that you would get rid of for people building affordable housing that would make sense?
I can't really come up with anything in particular that I would waive off. I'm an old municipal guy, so I'm not like against the municipalities collecting fees for their permitting, Every once in a while, I like to see a little bit of and as an affordable houser, we actually get a lot of waivers of those kinds of things. We don't have to build as much parking. We have some waivers of fees. I think that kind of works. I think the regulatory process for private folks, and this is how we would see it, and the cost that I would try to waive is the cost of the length of the time of permitting. Even in affordable housing where we're sort of getting money and we're getting grant sources, it still takes a year or so to pull all those resources together. Now, I say a year or so, and if I talk to my friends in San Francisco, they say 5 years. And I say $400,000, they say $800,000. So it's all relative to other markets. But I would look towards ways of us speeding up the opportunity to do development. Most developers would say if they could move faster, they would be financially in better shape.
Why does it take a year?
Before you actually put a 2x4 up, you have all these issues to deal with the land. It's like in Burlington, you have environmental issues, and even in other parts of this community in the state, brownfields kind of environmental issues. You have soil testings, you have an environmental assessment that you have to deal with. If you got an old building, you have to take that old building down in a certain kind of way. It just can't go down that easily. You have permitting, which requires both a local permit and a Act 250 permit. You get one before you can get the other, so that now you've added a few more months into that process. Every once in a while, you're getting state agencies that are a little slow in getting back to you. For us, regulatory-wise, we just have different pots of sources and different monies, and they're all in a cycle, and each one comes in after the other. Things like right-of-ways and just a wide range of things that sort of get in the way. It's frankly a lot easier to sort of take an old farm, although probably not as easy as I make it out to be, put in a road and put up a bunch of housing. Like building housing on Long Island back in the 50s was a dream. Big flat areas, just put a lot of asphalt down and sidewalks down, and put up a bunch of houses. That's why all that housing, hockey housing, nice flat old New North End area, plain as day, put up 1,200 square feet, allow a person to add something on to that little tenth of an acre or a quarter of an acre of land, and just build them, right? Simple and straightforward. Not a lot of permitting in the process. Pretty straightforward. And I think some of the developers who have been most successful, when we look at their book that they put together to do the various materials that are going to go into it, it's this thin. I'm sure.
And that's
very thin. It's very tiny. It's a fairly thin book of, this is what we're doing again, guys. This is we're doing this one again. Okay, yeah, we know how to do that one. And it's, you churn them out. You start the process and you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars before you even have the opportunity to actually build something. And you're risking a bunch of stuff. Now, most developers do really well. But I think that but having that predictability and having that clarity really would make a difference. On occasion, affordable housing folks around the state, less us, but certainly around the state, have been appealed, and sometimes it's taken years. I think in one term, almost a decade before a final permit came around. That's crazy. You're losing money like crazy.
Yeah.
Nothing good's coming out of that. Right now, if you ask those developers, they would say, geez, some lower interest rates. The interest rates have killed us.
But interest rates, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years ago seemed super low.
Yeah, they were super low. They were perfect for a developer. That's exactly right. You could borrow money for 2 or 3 years to do construction at 2%, and it hardly cost you anything. And that had real value. So that has an impact on the home ownership market because people can't afford now a higher priced home. I mean, this is what the Federal Reserve is trying to impact, is trying to reduce prices. If it costs more to borrow, therefore then prices will come down. Yeah, okay, but like on the housing market, it's not a good thing because we need to house people, right? But home ownership prices are supposed to be dipping or at least evening out because of interest rates. There is that. That's been proven to be true across the country. I'm not sure as much in Vermont. But lower cost for borrowing is a real key part. I think we do that. We need that. Most of the private guys I know who are looking at this saying it's just costing me too much to build. Even if they're doing market stuff, they don't want to be at such a high end that they're not going to be able to get anybody in wants. Now you're serving 1 or 2% of the population of the people. They really want to serve, the median income and above, right? And in order to do that, they need to be priced lower. In order to do that, they need a cost. They need less. They need money that's less expensive.
And all of these same reasons you've talked about with why people have difficulty buying a home, same reason why rents seem to be very high in say, Burlington.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. Again, if I asked a private developer guy like 3 years ago, how many people from out of state are looking at your property, they might have said, maybe I got 10% of the folks thinking about moving here. If I asked them that about a year ago, they say 50% of the people are from out of state thinking about moving here. And so when they look at their properties, they're going, I could charge this amount now because those folks from out of state are actually New York jobs or big city jobs, and they see the rents here and they're going, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
That has had an impact. You have housing going up right now in downtown Burlington where the rents are $3,000, $4,000. It's stunning. They're catering to a market that's out of town. So why is that important to the rest of the market? Well, landlords look at that and go, oh, why $1,200 a month? I could do 17. I could do 18. That's fair, right? So I'm just going to pop it up and I'm going to start raising rents. I could do that because the market's there. A lot of folks are being displaced because of the rents being so high. You're not going to be able to determine what equilibrium is because the market does have all these forces. What you could do is do some protection for tenants. You can give people an opportunity to perhaps, like as renters, to buy their homes. We had the same issue going on in mobile home parks a decade ago plus. I can't remember when.
Yep.
We gave people the chance to buy their park, right? Major difference. Maybe people who live in rental housing should have an opportunity to bid out on the pricing of the home so that they're not priced out. Maybe that opportunity should be out there. So there's some things that have to happen, I think, in terms of tenant protections, in terms of supporting what's happening in terms of displacement of people. But again, it's really a mix of things, building more units to get people who need affordable housing, getting those built. Building some market rate units are still good. Still a good idea. As long as there's more housing being built at the high end, the developers will work on the middle end as well. That's important to be able to do. The notion of ADUs and adding another unit to a single unit, those are all good. Those are not bad things. They're not going to solve the crisis. Nothing one thing is going to do that. It's going to have to be a mix of these things. And you can't despair too much about it, even though it doesn't feel good at any given moment, depending upon where you are. The last year, certainly. You have to sort of continue to move forward and do that right thing. Otherwise it'll only just get worse. It won't get better.
You and I have both lived in Burlington a long time. I don't remember people living in tents. Living outside, living in
It was Georgie Burdett who lived outside Finbar's in that little well. That was it.
Okay, and there was the way station over here, sure, but there weren't people sleeping out at night in the vestibule of the bank around the corner here.
No,
I mean,
but it was still a response to a crisis that still happened. Cots came out of cots being set up in Memorial Auditorium, right? Jim Rader, I think, was sort of given that responsibility to sort of run that thing out of Bernie's out of City Hall.
Yep.
That's how it got established, right? It was because suddenly there were homeless people, and we had to put up people somewhere. Shelter was built. The way station was built. St. John's Hall was built. A whole bunch of other things happened that COTS did. The crisis has gotten so dramatic that other people have needed to step in and do some more as well. So we have stepped in. Spectrum has sort of stepped up in terms of the work that they're doing. Steps to End Domestic Violence went from a little building like this to now 21 suites, and they're still wanting to do more. City has stepped up with pods in the shelter in South Winooski Avenue. It has been dramatic in terms of changes, but it isn't like it hasn't happened. This particular wave has been pretty intense. There was a push, I think. We remember the reason why there's so many people in the motel system, why that's not the number of homeless we thought it was. It was only 150, but suddenly the demand was 500, What was going on? It's because people living in housing couldn't cohabitate as easily. All right? People needed to move out. So a lot of people now who have moved out have been...
Why?
No, because of COVID.
Okay.
I mean, nobody visited each other. Remember, we were wiping our mail down and getting food delivered to our front porch, and nobody was allowed to be in our house unless they stayed in our house and didn't go anywhere. Right. People were being pushed out. They were being pushed out into the motel program. Being pushed out into the motel program then had a couple thousand people living in there. Then fentanyl and drugs came through, and people became addicted in part. Some of those people became addicted in part. That was sort of the match that lit, I think. And again, I think somewhat theoretical on my part, but at least from what I see, that's how it happened. You know better than most. That's how it happened.
Overall, you optimistic about this affordable housing issue?
Yeah. I mean, there are days when I'm not. Sometimes it's a harder thing to do than it should be. I'm often enough frustrated by the pace of things. I'm very impatient. I want things to move faster than they could. I want us to do more, and there's some limits to what we can do just because of who we are as humans and human resources, the amount of staffing we have, all that. But overall, I see a system in place that knows what it needs to get done, needs the resources to get it done. We have the capacity, we have the skills, and we have the ability in the state of Vermont to do this work. We need the resources to be able to do it. If you thought about child care 5 or 10 years ago, that's what they were saying. Affordable housing now is basically saying the same thing. A few other things are also saying that, but affordable housing is saying that now too. That's absolutely true. So I'm pretty positive and optimistic.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored in part by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks for listening.